Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on HTML5. I'm Romin Irani from Mindstorm Software, and I'll be taking you through the HTML5 demos as well as today. I wish to thank Spinedia for giving me another opportunity. So thanks once again for coming in, and let's begin with our HTML5 webinar. So what we'll be doing is going through various concepts of HTML5 and then looking at code and also seeing various examples in the browsers. Okay, we'll switch on to the slides now and we'll begin. Okay, so this is the agenda for the day. So what we're going to do is take a look at what HTML5 is, a brief history on HTML5. Then we'll get down to HTML5, its support in various browsers, both desktop as well as mobile. So we'll take a good look at what really is supported today in terms of different browsers. Then we're going to delve down into various HTML5 APIs. So we'll look at the Canvas API, location, storage. So we'll take a good look at some of the APIs. Obviously, the whole HTML5 specification is quite large, but this should give you good enough grounding to understand the kind of APIs that HTML5 brings to the table and the kind of applications that you can ultimately write. And then we'll look at various demos as well as go into code, and then also look at what the current support for HTML5 is, the road forward, and how you can start using HTML5 today. So let's begin. So here's a brief history of what HTML5 is. So really, I've just split it down into the what, who, and when. And in a very simple words, HTML5 is the next generation HTML. Obviously, it's not just a bunch of new tags that they have added. They've added a lot of APIs also that give rise to completely different experience in terms of your web applications. So it almost mirrors the kind of native apps that your applications can start simulating, even though they are web apps by nature. Who are the organizations that brought HTML5 specification to life, right? So one is the WOT-G group, the W3C group, which you must be familiar with, is responsible for a lot of other HTML specifications, and the Internet Engineering Task Force. So these were the three, high-level working groups that were responsible for HTML5. And then in the when, various dates or years basically, which shows you the kind of history that HTML5 has gone through. So we'll begin with 2004. That's when the first set of people came together and decided that HTML4, the previous version of the specification, needed a revamp. It needed to change itself in order to meet the different nature of applications that were getting built, and also to mirror some of the native features that are there in other applications. So 2004 is when a bunch of people got together from various leading companies and started defining the scope of HTML5. 2008 is when they actually came up with a first working draft of the HTML5 specification. Obviously, it was much more smaller in terms of what it is today, which, if you want to know, it's around 1,000 pages in length, the total specification. But 2008 is when it came up with its first working draft with a few specifications, which the browser vendors were then requested to take and start implementing it in their browsers. 2011 was when the first recommendation was made in terms of a lot of specifications went through various iterations. The browser vendors implemented it. So taking all this feedback from the users gave rise to a first recommendation. And 2014 is when they expect that most of the browsers would start supporting a large part of the specification. Do not assume even for a moment that all the browsers from every vendor will start supporting it 100%, but we can be reasonably sure, even as of today, that a good percentage of it, around 70 to 80% of it, including the key features, are well supported by the vendors. Now, always this question comes up, if you've done any programming, you know that most of the vendors typically have different, by vendors I mean browser vendors. They've got different support in their browser. Some of them are incompatible. But for the first time, actually, HTML5 has found a common ground in most of them, and they are all supporting this standard. This includes even Microsoft for that matter. And the support is widespread. It's not just across vendors and their desktop browsers, but even in mobile browsers, especially the ones that we have today in our smartphones, the support is pretty good. So the question normally that comes up is, okay, if HTML5 is not fully supported 100%, can we start using it today? The answer is yes. People have been using it since years. Even as of today, a large amount of this specification is fully supported by the browsers. So as of today itself, or as we speak, you can start using HTML5. And if you just visit various sites also, a lot of them have moved key parts of their web functionality, which was previously dependent on Flash, and made HTML5 versions of it. So that's in summary a brief history of what HTML5 has gone through. Now we'll look at browser support. As I mentioned earlier, browser support is quite good from different vendors. All of them are supporting the HTML5 standard. So with every release, you will find that certain specifications are supported more, newer specs also supported. So as time goes by, the support for from browsers for HTML5 is only keeping on improving. Microsoft also has been a good supporter of HTML5, and they've got an entire initiative to support HTML5 fully. And now, obviously we live in a world where not everyone can progress to the latest browser. We can't just expect that everyone is going to upgrade their browsers to the latest and greatest browser that supports HTML5. So what happens when people visit HTML5 sites written today with older browsers? The thing is, as a developer, I speak here from a developer perspective, is that you will have to have a fallback mechanism by which you will check in your code if it's a latest browser or not, and then move on to filling up the support. So that's what is called polyfills. Polyfills are basically JavaScript libraries that are a wide variety of them are available today, and they take care of the scenario where if your browser is not supporting the HTML5 specific APIs, then it falls back onto a simpler mechanism. So from a programming or developer aspect, it's pretty much hidden from you, and you can continue to use the same API. Alternately, today, if you want to actually even find out that how good is my browser support, just launch your browser, whether it's Chrome, Firefox, or Opera, Safari, whichever one you prefer, and simply visit a site like caniuse.com or html5test.com, and you will get a nice browser score that will say which specification of HTML5 is supported, what is not yet supported. So that's a good way to find out, how the browser vendors are progressing in their support for HTML5. And the symbols which I have put over there in the first row, you find not just the primary desktop browser vendors, but below I've kept all the smartphones. And believe it or not, some of the best HTML5 support in browsers is also present on the smartphones that we have today. And one of the prime reasons behind this is that most of the browser vendors have started to standardize on the WebKit browser engine. So WebKit is the primary driving force, or the engine you can say, behind the browsers. And various of these vendors, they simply embed the WebKit browser and keep enhancements on top of it. That's why you're finding relatively good standardized support across browsers. Okay, so what we're going to do now is sort of jump down into a wide spectrum of the different areas that HTML5 brings to the table. So as we go through some of this, at a high level, it's good to understand the different APIs and features that HTML5 is bringing to the table today. Now, these are official icons from the HTML5 specification. So, when you visit other HTML5 sites on the web, At times you will find these icons being used so that they categorize the kind of HTML5 specification that they are talking about. So let's look at some of them in brief. Then we are going to break down into some of these in further detail in terms of demos and code. So let's look at semantics. By semantics, what HTML5 brings to the table is a set of newer tags, a set of simplified tags. You know, your doc type and the HTML tag right on top becomes extremely simple. They've also released several other tags which we'll see in a while for navigation. So that brings up a good structure to your page. CSS tree. CSS tree, you know, it's a significant enhancement from a programmatic centric way of looking at it over the earlier CSS versions. You know, many things previously that we used to do via images like rounded corners for buttons and things like that, or even moving an image, putting it at a certain angle. A lot of these are now directly available in the CSS tree specification. That makes your life as a developer much easier because you don't have to figure out what are the JavaScript libraries which do this, and you know, it just removes a lot of boilerplate code that you are typically putting in your applications. Multimedia, that's one of the key features, you know, that's normally talked about in the press. So and it always spoken in relation to Flash. Now multimedia is basically your audio and video, and HTML5 actually makes audio video as first class citizens. So what that means is that there are new tags which we'll see in a while introduced by HTML5 for audio and video. It's as simple as using your image a tag where you simply take a source and point it to either an image. In this case, for audio video, it will be pointing to your audio file or the video file. And so what this brings to the table is, hey, you don't need a Flash plugin anymore if you're looking at playing certain kinds of media content. You know, you can simply continue to use pure HTML and deliver the content to your users. Graphics and 3D. Here, you know, it's quite amazing that a lot of things that were done by Flash, where you could do complicated 3D graphics, 2D graphics, coloring, shading, and various vector objects. Really, HTML5 brings to the table something called a Canvas API. So a Canvas API literally stands for what it says, that is, the whole screen literally becomes a canvas by which you can start drawing anything that you want, including primitives like lines, circles, and then build on to more complex shapes. So we'll take a look at some of the samples for you know, the Canvas API. Device access. I mean, there's no way that we start using you know, any of these things unless the platform is able to connect to different devices that could be there on your desktop or on your smartphones. So the device sensors that I'm talking about primarily could be GPS. All of us are aware of GPS. It gives us latitude, longitude. HTML5 is an excellent API called the geolocation API, which we'll see. And that allows us to get latitude, longitude right from within your web applications without writing a lot of other code. As you move forward, you know, in the specification, there's already the specification calls for support like webcam and things like that in HTML, including audio, you know, recognition. So as you move forward, maybe a year or so from now, you can be fairly confident that you'll even have integration of webcam, audio recognition, recorders, and everything right within HTML5 spec. And the beauty about it is, it's just going to be a new bunch of HTML tags that you have to learn in order to bring that powerful functionality within your browser. Performance, right? Often they complain against web applications is that they are too slow, you can't do background processing and things like that. No more. With web workers, one of the specifications in HTML5, you can actually take a chunk of the work that you want to do, give it to a worker thread kind of a thing, and it completes the work and gives back a notification to your page. So that's why we are talking about performance. Look at offline and storage. I mean, this is key if web applications have to replace native applications at any point in time. So by offline and storage, what we are talking about is that even if you don't have network connectivity, and that's a reality in our world where we may not have network access all the time, we can actually still continue to use our application. The data that we store, we can store in a API provided by HTML5 called the local storage API that allows us to store almost 5 to 10 MB of data right within the browser itself. So you can store data even if you close the browser, even if you come back and visit the site again, the data is going to be right there. And when you may have network connectivity, you can sync it up with the server. So offline and storage APIs are extremely key, and that's what brings to reality the fact that even without a network connection, it's perfectly possible for you to continue to use your web applications. And that was not really the thinking before, where people say, okay, if you don't have net connectivity, your web app will never work. That's no longer the case. And connectivity finally. Here, what HTML5, one of the APIs it brings to the table is WebSockets, and that's a bidirectional protocol that allows you to get notifications, right within your web application from the server side. So it's extremely fast protocol, and it's heavily used right now in financial sites where the stock tickers and any other prices have to be delivered constantly to the desktop. So in this case, using a protocol like WebSockets, of course you need a WebSockets compliant server, but it brings to reality completely duplex and push notification right within your web applications. So this in summary is really the different features of HTML5 at a very high level. I mean, as you dig deeper into each of these, and mind you, if you go to the HTML5 working group specifications, you will find that each of these areas that we're seeing right now here has its own specification. So tomorrow, if you feel that you're not interested in graphics and 3D for HTML5, don't bother about it. You simply focus on the other specifications. Let's say you want to know what are the full capabilities of audio video. You can simply look at the multimedia specification, or if you want to know more about CSS3, pick up each of these individual specifications. That's the nice part about the spec. Though I said earlier in the webinar that it's about 1,000 pages plus in length, you are free to actually take any of these specs, learn more about it, and start using it in your application. Okay, so this is now about semantics. We are going to start looking at what semantics and how it makes it easier. Semantics basically means that a simpler doc type. We'll see that in a while. HTML5 has also released a set of new tags which bring the whole structure to the page. So they've got a header, they've got a footer, they've got a section tag. So you don't have to play a lot with the div tags. If you've done any web programming, you would have known that you play a lot with the div tags, and then you need to make sense of it. But now you have proper first-class tags available in HTML5 itself that bring the structure to your pages. And now at the same time, it's eliminated several tags also which were earlier there. So let's start looking at some of the semantic changes that it brought about. So first we'll begin with a simplified doc type. If you've written an HTML5 page, you would have seen that the whole doc type declaration on top is pretty involved. And an example of that is shown over here. But when you actually see HTML5, what it does is it's saying all you need to do is simply say it's a doc type and it's of type HTML. This is enough for the browser to identify that this is a HTML5 document. So you don't have to get now involved writing the doc type in this particular manner. Simply say doc type HTML and you're set. Let's look at another enhancement that HTML5 has simplified really. Look at the character set. You specify what, whether it's UTF-8 or any other character set that your page uses. So the earlier way, if you look at it, is quite involved. But now in HTML5, you simply have to mention it in a very simple way as shown below. You simply say the char set is equal to UTF-8 and you're set. Okay. Now this brings to a section where I mentioned that HTML5 has introduced several new tags, especially in the semantics area, which bring meaning to the structure of your pages. So if you recollect, if you have written any web pages before, you would have known there are a lot of div tags which you have to write, and you give names like its header, its footer, and things like that. But now what HTML5 has done is that it's introduced several tags which you see over here. So you see header, you see nav, you see section, and look at how I've shown the page on the right side, which shows how the page can be broken up. So that shows a typical page layout where normally the web pages have a header, have a footer, maybe they have a left navigation, maybe they have a right navigation. These are optional things. And then you've got a section, different headers and things like that. So now instead of complicating your web pages with div tags, you can actually use these semantic tags, so that the advantage of this is not that it does anything at a high level. In terms of visibility, this tag does not do anything. But what happens is, as you see other people's code, or if you've got a larger team, a set of common tags which the specification supports itself will definitely bring more structure and organization to your pages and make it easier for even others to understand what they are. And what you need to do in order to render these is nothing but apply the right CSS styles to these particular tags. So at the end of the day, in terms of styling, you just have to find out that, okay, for the header I'm going to apply this tag, for the footer I'm going to apply this tag. So it makes your CSS also much more cleaner in order to see what the structure of the page is. That's semantics. Let's now move on to forms. All of us have visited websites. All of us have filled one or more forms. Starting from the login form to a shopping cart. We fill forms since we started using the web, basically. And primarily, if you are a developer, what happens is that when you write forms in HTML, especially if you're not using HTML5, is that you need to write a lot of code, especially when it comes to validations, especially when it comes to showing the right kind of widgets, because HTML on its own doesn't support a lot of rich widgets. So if you're using any other web frameworks, you pull out what would be a nice looking calendar or date widget and things like that. But now, now let's look at the flip side of things, right? As a user, you want to fill forms as quickly as possible. You want the experience to be nice, so that you can fill out forms in a painless manner. So keeping all these things in mind, what the HTML5 specification brought to the table when it came to forms is that forms typically need to enter data that is of different kind. So you have email, you've got phone numbers that you need to enter, maybe you've got dates and years to be entered, colors, for example. Even at times when you have to enter a number, or a number only within a certain range. So what happens is, instead of giving a text box and then letting the user figure out whether to enter a number and whether it's the right range, what if there were already controls that the browser took care of while rendering? So for example, if your input field is of type phone, and if someone visits your website on a mobile phone, it's important that when they tap that particular text field, you only show a numeric keypad instead of showing an alphanumeric keypad and then letting them switch to the numeric one. Similarly, when it comes to email, it would be nice if you already had a keyboard that has the @ symbol, which is often used in email. If you are going to enter a URL, how about having a keypad with a .com on this? So what HTML5 has done is that it's created several input types. So you must be familiar with the normal HTML input tag. So what you need to do simply is say inputs, and then you say type equal to email, or type equal to phone, or type equal to URL, and then the browser takes care of rendering the right thing for you. So let's look at sample screenshots later on that come, and then we'll see the code also. Let's look at this screen, and what you'll find is I've shown 3 screens over here where look at the part where it says form and input type equal to URL. That's the first part. The second one is a simple form where it says type equal to email. And the third part is again the same form except the type equal to number. And what happens on a mobile phone, for example, is that when you actually tap the text field, for the type that is URL, you will notice that it has a com button at the bottom that makes it easier to enter the URL. Similarly, look at the email, the second one. You will find that the keyboard has changed dynamically and it has a an @ symbol that makes it simpler to type an email. Look at the whole keyboard that changed for the third option, which is when the type is equal to number. It's actually provided a numeric keypad instead of alphanumeric keypad. So that just makes it more simpler for the user to enter it. And who does all this hard work? From a developer perspective, you are simply good by saying input type equal to whatever. It is the browser that's going to actually start rendering it for you correctly. So forms have got different support when it comes to HTML5 form controls. So different browsers support different controls. Not all of them support it, but we'll take a look at some of the examples so you can see how it's getting rendered. So before we go on to the Canvas API, I'm going to switch over to the forms thing so that we can see actually the forms code in action. So I'm going to share my screen and move over to another demo so you can see the forms working. I'll show you in two different browsers, Chrome as well as Opera browser that I have over here, and we'll also look at the code. So I'm going to start sharing my screen over here. So give a minute, please. Okay, so what I have over here is a demo page that I've created for this webinar, and we're going to start looking at different examples as and when we move from the slides to the particular sections. So first I would like to show you the different form controls. So here I'm using actually the Chrome browser, and I've got a variety of controls over here. Just let's take a look at it. Okay, so what you find is that I have actually just created a simple HTML form with a name, date of birth, email address, blog site URL, a ratings control, and a numeric range over here. And let's look at the source code for this just for a moment. Okay. Now in the source code you'll find it's a pretty much standard HTML5 page that I've discussed. I've discussed a simple doc type which you see at the top and a char set. Now let's get back to the form, right? Now, the basic things that you knew about HTML that do not change. So basically you've got a form over here, and what happens is that it's got the same input fields that you see in the screen over there. So we had the first name, we had the last name, the date of birth, phone number, email address. And what you find for each of these is that I've actually given the type. So pay attention to that. So apart from normal name and ID attributes, we've also got the type. So we've got type equal to text, we've got type equal to telephone, then we've got type equal to email in the particular form. Now Placeholder is a nice attribute which once you enter over there, it just gives a hint to the user as to what you are entering. Then we've also got the ratings and we've got the other range where you can actually specify that what is the minimum and what is the maximum values for your ratings bar. So if I switch right now to the Chrome browser, which renders that same page, you will find that it's actually showing the placeholders, the one which you see. Now as you start typing over there, the placeholder goes away. And then if you tab out, it's going to remain whatever value you give. But let's say that you remove that, it brings that whole functionality back into the placeholder. So these are the things that HTML5 is automatically giving to you via the placeholder attribute. So imagine if you didn't have this and had to actually write JavaScript code, it would be quite involved. Now look at date of birth. We said that the type is equal to date, but it has not rendered it in any kind of a date control. That is because Chrome browser, for example, does not support the date control as of now. It just falls back onto the text type over here. But I'll just switch over to the Opera browser for the same page, and you will notice that Opera has a much wider support for some of the controls that we are seeing. So I'm going to switch over to the Opera browser, and you will find over here that the date control is rendered a bit differently. So when I click on it, you find that the entire date control has popped up. So what this shows you is that as we move forward, there are still certain parts of the HTML5 specification which different browsers are in different phases of implementation, but some browsers are much ahead in terms of certain specifications. But eventually when you look at it, this is going to remove a lot of the code that you would have to ideally write. So you simply said type equal to date, and look, it just popped up the whole date control out for you. Similarly, this whole thing about the range control, that's supported in both of them, this numeric control. So you just say type equal to range and then give an upper range, minimum and max, and it does the work for you. In fact, if you see this form on a mobile browser, you will find that as you start entering the URL or the email, it would pop up the right virtual keyboard screen, which has only the @ sign or the numeric sign and things like that. So that's one kind of example. Let me just switch over to the source code again. I want to show you another piece of thing. Now, if you notice at the first one, which is username, right? What we've done is, apart from saying that its type is text and it has a placeholder, you notice there is another keyword that I've put over here called required. Now what this does is, it's a way of telling the browser that this field is mandatory and the user needs to enter that, and only then the form can be submitted to the server. Now if you had done any kind of form validation programming in HTML, you would have noticed that it's quite a bit of task to do all validations, what's the kind of value and things like that. Now HTML5 makes this extremely simple. You simply say required, and depending upon the type, the browser is able to take care with inbuilt validation. So let's look at the experience where we say that this field was required, and if we try to submit the form, what happens in the browser. It's pretty interesting. And you get this feature straight off by just saying that the attribute is required. So I'm going to switch over to the example. And if you look at the form, it's the same form here. Now I have not entered any value for the name. I'm going to just try to submit this form, and when I do that, it pops up a field which says please fill out this field. So this is not something that I have coded. It is just something that is brought to the fore by the browser itself. Let me show you the same behavior, whether it works or not in Opera, so you get an idea about the cross-platform or cross-browser support, I would say, that HTML5 enjoys. So I'll switch over to the Opera browser. And again, I'm not going to enter the value over there. I'm just going to leave it empty and try to submit, and boom, it says this is a required field. So that's the again behavior that's brought up by the Opera browser. So this is given to you off the bat via HTML. Okay, so I'll switch back to my presentation and we'll move on to the next topic. Okay, we're going to start looking at the Canvas API now. The Canvas is again part of the whole graphics section of the HTML5 API. And what it does literally is it brings to the table a 2D or two-dimensional drawing API, and that gives you access to a lot of primitives. You can draw lines, you can draw arcs, circles, you can fill it up with certain gradients or some fill color. So, you know, pretty much think of it as the image over there which shows an artist's canvas. Literally, that's the kind of control you have, where you can stroke anything, you can with a certain color, and then start creating from primitive objects. You can start creating fairly complicated, graphics things, including charts and graphs. So typically, you have people saying that if you want to show any business charts like pie charts or bar graphs, you will have to use the Flash player and the charting library. That's no longer the case. You actually have HTML5 based a graph API that lets you create all these charts. So again, everything is controlled via JavaScript and CSS. So we'll start looking at some of these examples now. We'll take a look at it after a while. We'll look at Canvas, and we'll cover a few topics first, and then we'll switch over to a lot of the code. That will help instead of switching to and fro. So I'll move on to the next topic, which is multimedia. And so what we'll do is we'll look at Canvas, and then we'll look at the multimedia examples at the same time. Let's just cover multimedia in brief. It's a short topic. So as mentioned earlier, audio and video have now become first-class citizens in HTML5. So what it means is you no longer need the Flash plugin to deliver audio and video content to your users. And the usage is extremely simple, as we'll see now in the next slide. So what we have is the new tags that HTML5 has introduced. They are video and audio tag, and the usage is as simple as how you are used to using the image tag. So all you need to do is mention the source of the video or the source of the audio. And I've just given here a link directly, but you could actually point it. It could be there on your web server or even a relative path within your web directory that's hosted somewhere. Now, this is the simplest way in which you can actually deliver audio and video. Obviously, in order to make sure that people are able to create optimum media experiences, they've actually given the entire JavaScript API also. So you can actually play the audio, you can stop it, you can pause it, you can seek and go to a certain section in the media file. So tremendous control is there in terms of the file that you are playing. So what we'll do now is we'll switch over again and see examples of Canvas. We'll see examples of audio, video, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Kindly hold on as we share the screen. Okay, so again we are back to the demo page, and here we are going to look at a variety of Canvas examples. So that gives you a feel to the kind of imaging that is possible with the Canvas API. We'll first look at some very primitive examples in terms of drawing a simple line, a rectangle, and then see how maybe a chessboard could be rendered, or even look at charts and then actually some game animation. And remember, this is all Canvas API. It uses the 2D context and it does not use any Flash player stuff. So let's look at the line example. Okay. Yeah, once it comes up, I mean, to keep things simple, we just kept it as minimal as possible. And if you notice here, I'll just click this, and on that, it will end up drawing a line. Click that, and you'll see an entire line being drawn diagonally across. So while this is simple enough, it just demonstrates the kind of thing that's available to you. And if you look at this code, let's look at the code for a moment. Okay, so here's the code that I have. So let's go down first to the HTML part. So I had two anchors where I was just saying that click to draw a line and click to clear. So if you click to draw a line, and if you look at click to draw a line, you will find that all it is doing is it's invoking a method called draw line. Now look at the canvas. The canvas is any area that you define on your screen, right? And now over here, it's a new tag obviously. So we are saying that I want a canvas or a drawing area with an ID called my canvas, and its width is 200 and height is 200. I could give any other width also. So, but what I've done is I've defined an area on my screen that I could use to draw. So now when I click the draw line, I'm simply invoking a straightforward method in JavaScript called draw underscore line. And when we visit that, let's see what it does. Okay, now in draw line, what we find is that this is the first line that you see is a very straightforward JavaScript standard call. It just says get me the handle to the canvas object. That's the first part. Once I have the handle to the canvas object, there is a method now defined on the Canvas API called get me the two-dimensional context. So once I have the context, basically that's like a context or a stroke or a paintbrush that I've got now in my hand, which I can use to draw. So now if you look at it, it's got very straightforward APIs, and this is just a sampling of the APIs that I'm showing over here. So in order to draw a line, what we are doing is we are saying go to the uppermost left corner, move to that, draw a line to the bottom right corner, and it was a height 200, 200. So we've just said get me the 2D context, move to the top left, then draw a line from top left to 200, 200, which is the bottom right, and then complete the stroke. That means that's at that point in time, basically it will join the 2 points that you navigated. So drawing a line this is the way it's done. And the function that you see below is a very quick way of just clearing of the whole canvas, or just blanking it out. So again, the code is same way: get the canvas, get the 2D context, and then we simply say clear the rectangle, which is basically a quick way of taking the current stroke fill that is there, and then just clearing of the area that we have defined for the canvas, which was 200 and 200. So that's a simple way of drawing a line. Let's see some of the other examples. They work in a similar fashion. So I'm going to go back to my demo application, which has all the examples over there. So that's a line. Now let's look at the rectangle example. I'll click that. So again, the whole UI is focusing on the primitive, so that you just see it work first. So now we have learned how to draw a line. If you look at the rectangles in the same fashion, click to draw. It brings forward a straightforward rectangle in the area that we have defined. That's what it just throws up. And if you look at the code for that, I'll just bring that up. Okay. So here you will find that instead of draw line, I've got the draw rectangle. The two statements that you see are common. Get the canvas, get the 2D context, and then instead of doing a move to line 2 and a stroke, I'm just going to call one method called stroke the rectangle. So this is the way I quickly go and create the whole rectangle. Now these are methods that are present in the Canvas API itself. Let's see some more examples. So now we are going to see examples where actually we have used the line, rectangle, and stroke fill in a more complicated fashion that will help you see how different things can be drawn on the screen. So I'm going to switch over to the example page now. Okay, I'll switch over to a chessboard example that I have here. And then in the chessboard example, it's again the same way, except that instead of drawing the lines and the rectangles, I'm just going to draw it in a more complex fashion. So when I click on draw a chessboard, you will find that it just almost mirrors a 8 by 8 chessboard on the screen over here. So really the source code, if you see, is going to be almost similar, where we basically first draw the lines, horizontal ones, then we draw the vertical lines, and then we fill a rectangle in a certain color, whether it's black or white, depending upon the odd or even nature of it. So I'll go now and show you another example of, say, business charts, which actually uses the Graph API. So again, it's using the Canvas API, but it is going to utilize the same way by which more complicated charts can be shown. So HTML5 recipes. So for example, now look at the different graphs that are shown over here. Now you can see that it's got the bar charts and it's got the pie charts also. So this is again done using the graph or basically the Canvas API itself. So again, if you look at it, you will be able to break down all the primitives properly. So you will see line primitives, you will see a rectangle primitives, then it's coloring it with a particular color. Okay. Now let's look at a final demonstration for the Canvas API. So in the Canvas API, we are going to look at this animation thing. So basically, again, this is done using the Canvas API, and you can actually move, a ball or a circle along on the screen, keep it within a certain area, and it appears over there. So you can even change the velocity. So again, this is all about the whole HTML5 Canvas-based API that's there. Okay. Now I'm going to go on to the audio and video demonstrations for the HTML5 API. Sorry. Okay. So I'm going to first show the basic audio and video demonstration. I'm going to click that. And this brings to a page where I'm showing a particular video. And in the video, basically, I'll just show you the source code first. Okay, so this is the actual basic audio video example over here. So if you see, all that we have in our page is a simple video tag, and it's basically pointing to the source, which is where the MP4 video is getting played. And basically on the click of the video, all we are going to do is say play it, and it has got some controls and a width and height. So let's see the thing work first. So this is the basic audio video page that's I'm switching to right now in the demo. And if I just click on the the video over there, it's going to start playing accordingly. So it might not get refreshed correctly on your screen, but the entire video gets played. So this is as simple as putting a video tag pointing your source to the particular video file. Let's look at another custom video example. This is pretty interesting. So I've got a custom audio and video player, and here you will see the richness or the kind of experiences that you can bring to the table using HTML5. So I'll just click that. So here what I have is actually a sort of my own little drawing of the TV and stuff like that. And inside it, I have embedded the video tag. And if you play this, then you'll see it, working within that itself. So you might see some music getting and things like that. So the entire video tag can be put in a, sort of a skinning concept over here. And it's not just about video. I'll just switch over to audio also. So from the tag above. So I've got this little cassette player that's shown over here, and different cassettes that you can actually put in and start playing with a play and pause button. So if I click one of this, you'll see the music, and it plays it. I clicked on the pause button to stop it. I can keep switching the cassette. So it's really about the audio and video tags, but you can bring it to the table using this itself without using the Flash player plugin. So I'm going to now switch over to the slides where we'll cover now the local storage and GPS features of it. Okay, so we'll move forward from the audio video thing. So now we are going to look at the device access category. In device access category is quite interesting in a sense that it's not just right now geolocation API. Geolocation API is the HTML5 API via which you can actually get the latitude, longitude from right within the browser itself. There are also various other APIs that HTML5 supports. So anyone who's interested in learning more about it can visit some of these features. So we've got also the drag and drop API by which you can move controls. You have full access to the file system, of course, within a particular sandbox. Speech input, you'll have a small audio tag, and if you speak in it, it'll try to decode what you actually spoke. accelerometer support, device orientation is coming in HTML5. And then, as I said, the webcam support right now is the spec level, but most of the browser vendors are going forward to implement it. So we'll particularly look at the geolocation API, which is quite interesting because it gives you latitude, longitude, and that can help you actually come up with location-based applications. So the geolocation API, right? I mean, in simple terms, it's going to determine where the device is. By that we mean the latitude and longitude. And it's not necessary that, for example, the desktop that I'm using should have the GPS receiver in it. It is going to use the Wi-Fi networks also to determine what is the closest location that it can figure out for you. So obviously it's useful for providing location-based services, and the user should be allowed to opt in because it's a privacy thing. So you will see that all the browsers have anyway built in permission-based grant, and they ask the user that this application is going to try and track you, is it okay or not. So that's actually built for you in the browser itself. And JavaScript APIs are there to get not just a one-time location, but let's say even if you are moving, you can actually continuously monitor and see what the new latitude longitude is. So you can determine and say that no, give me a latitude longitude every 15 minutes, or you can say that only if a person has moved about a kilometer or so, then give a latitude longitude. So both options are available. You can just get a one-time lat long, or you get a continuous latitude longitude depending upon the parameters that you specify. Look at the geolocation API and storage API examples in a moment. Let's first go through with the slides. So that's the geolocation API. The other API that I had mentioned earlier was about the offline and storage. And by offline and storage, what we are talking about is that even if the network is not present, you should be able to continue functioning. So what it means is, can I store some data maybe in the local storage of the browser, so that if I'm not using the application, or if I close it down and come back to it later, at least my work is not lost. So that is definitely possible with the local storage API. By the way, local storage API is a simple key value or a map that you can store in your browser. We'll see that in a moment. If people want more advanced storage, they can also go for the indexed DB specification. Prior to IndexedDB, there was the Web SQL specification, and what it means is actually you have an SQL database right within your browser. So you can create a database, you can create tables, you can file select statements, insert statements, and all within the browser itself. And this again is persistent storage. So even if you're going to shut down your session or the browser or close the machine, come back to it, it's going to still remain. We'll see an example of the offline storage in a moment. So that's the storage API which I was talking about. Now this offline storage or the local storage API is available in different flavors. One is the session and local storage. Session and local storage means it's simply nothing but a map. So you can store simple key value pairs. Now the value is a serialized string. So ultimately you can have a large amount of data, whether it's JSON or XML encoded also. Look at the limit that it allows. 5 to 10 MB per domain is the kind of space that you have per application in your local storage. And IndexedDB storage again is a more heavy duty form of it. But if you're looking at actually using databases with tables and things like that, you can go for the IndexedDB storage also. But while working with this, keep in mind that you need to identify from your application what it needs to store, what brings a completely offline experience to reality. So for example, if people are going out in the field, they are taking down some work orders, it's likely that they may not have network connection. In that scenario, it's better if you let them continue saving the data and putting it into the local storage so that it's not lost. And then when network comes up, by the way, there's an API to even get whether you're online or offline. In that scenario, you can play all your transactions or sync the transactions from the local storage to the server side. Okay. Now, of course, we've seen so far, at a very high level, 4 to 5 different areas of HTML5. We've looked at Canvas, we looked at local storage. We'll see the examples of local storage and GPS or geolocation in a while, but we've looked at 4 to 5 such areas, but that's not just the entire breadth of HTML5 specification. You've got a lot more other features that I had earlier mentioned. If you're looking at some processing in the background, there is the web workers specification. You've got WebSockets, which is a bidirectional real-time connectivity protocol, so you can actually get notifications within your browser. IndexedDB is a sort of a mixture of the web SQL and a map-like thing. Content editable feature means any kind of your controls are editable on the screen. You can simply tap and start changing the labels. History management API is given. Cross-document messaging. If you've done any Ajax programming, you know that cross-domain requests are typically not allowed, but here there are means by which you can actually get content from other domains itself. So really what want you to take back from this overall is that there's a lot of areas that HTML5 looks at. The goal of HTML5 is to be simple and to make tags as well as JavaScript APIs such that you can create almost desktop-like experiences within your browser themselves. So we're going to switch first to demonstrations for the geolocation thing and for local storage, and then we'll come back to some concluding slides. So we're looking at, and then after that we'll take a few question and answers. So I'll share my screen in a while, just hold on. Okay, so I'm going to look at the local storage example first, and then I'll move on to the geolocation part. So let me just bring this up and also show you actually where it's being stored in the browser. So I'll launch the local storage example. And here it's a very straightforward text field that you will see. And basically it's just telling you to type some text over here. Now, as we type text, what's going to happen is it's going to actually save it. So that even if I come back later to this application, my values or whatever I type over here should be there. So I'll just say HTML5 webinar. Now let's say I've typed only this much so far, right? Now the question is, where is it all going? Where is it getting all saved? So Chrome, for example, gives you, and it's true for other browsers also, it gives you a set of tools which make it easier for you to see what all storage is there, what are the network calls being made, and a lot of underlying mechanisms that are going on in your browser. So one option for you is to simply click on the settings tab and go into tools and developer tools, or simply press F12. That brings up an entire sort of a UI over here that shows you the internals of what's happening in your browser. And if you look at on the left side over here at the bottom, you find local storage and localhost. So whatever be the domain that you are accessing the site from, so for example here we are going localhost/HTML5 webinar. So under localhost, if you find we've stored some particular keys and values. Now many other applications could have stored a variety of values, but if you look at this value over here, you find that it's actually got the value that we typed, HTML5 webinar. Let me go back to that field and type something more. Thank you for attending it. Okay. Now, if I just switch, and go back and see my local host, you will find that it's actually got the thank you for attending it. So exactly what you have typed is getting stored. So that's the power of the local storage, where it's actually remaining over here. Now let's say I go over here, I just close this, you know, what you call site, and then I go back and I enter a new URL again for that. And when I revisit it, I'll find that it's actually loaded up the page and it's got my values back. So that shows you, and if I visit again the local storage and I see the local host and the value for that, you will see that it still has the value within this. So you know, this is different from your cookies. You can store a large amount of data, but this completely lets you create offline applications. You can as well create a string which is an XML or JSON and keep everything over here also if you've got several records that you want to store. So that's the local host thing for you. And the code wise, again, it's straightforward. Let me just get that. Okay, so what I have is like I'm creating this text area first initially, which is normal HTML stuff over here, and then you will find that I'm just determining whether it has any value, and if it does have a value, then all I have to do is just say window.localstorage.getItem. So there are simple methods like getItem, setItem, remove item, clear, and things like that. Various methods are there on local storage. In this case, it's a get item, and the parameter that I need to pass is the key value. So in our case, it was called the value. So I'm simply retrieving it and assigning it to the particular edit text. If not, I'm just saying enter the value over here. And then, you know, as I'm typing every key, I am just listening to the key up event, which means that the moment I type a key and I release the key up event is fired, and at that particular point in time, I just do a set item. That means I just overwrite it with the current value that has got typed in the particular text area. And then I'm also saving another map value, which is a timestamp that just shows when I've saved it. So really, get item, set item by the key name is all you need to do in terms of local storage. And the value data type is a string for your information. I'm going to go now to the GPS examples. Sorry. So let me go back there. So in the GPS example, we are going to see how it's easy to get a latitude and longitude, and then also a simple integration with a Google map kind of a scenario, where I'll use the latitude, longitude, and then I'll use the GPS to show the particular Google map on it. So I'm going to go to this geolocation, get latitude, longitude. I'm going to click that. Okay. So again, it's just going to have at a high level a single button called Find My Location, and when I actually click Find My Location, that's when it's going to go ahead and get the particular latitude and longitude for the page. So let me click the Find My Location. So it just says that your browser supports geolocation. That's a simple what you call as alerts that I'm showing in my page. And then when I go there and click it, you will find that it shows that your location details are current latitude, longitude is 19.1 and longitude is 72.88. So this is actually it's got from the Wi-Fi networks whatever is the closest latitude, longitude that it found. Now I'll just switch over to a slight extension of this example where I use the current lat long and then I show the Google map for it. Give you a good idea of where I'm sitting currently and showing this demo. So I'm going to go and say integration with Google Maps. Show me that example. So what this example is an extension of the previous one only, and all it does is it actually just gets the lat long, and then it uses the Google Maps API to create the push button or the pin for where I'm actually currently located as per my latitude longitude. So this gives you a good example of how using a few lines of code you can literally pick up the lat long of the user and integrate it into a map situation. Let's look at the source code quickly as to what it takes to get a lat long. I'm going to switch over to the code for the moment. Okay. So you will find that just like any other JavaScript APIs which we have seen for Canvas, we have seen for storage, again geo location string also is a JavaScript API. So on a button click, at the bottom, all I'm doing is saying that find my current location. That's the method that is going to get called. So it's a simple input type which is a button, and on click call the method find my current location. If you look at the method for find my current location, I'm just switching over to method. You will find that first thing you need to do is just find out whether your browser supports geolocation standard, which is again an HTML5 thing. So all you need to do is just like how you had window dot the local storage thing. Here it is called navigator dot geolocation. So you get the geo service, and then if it is true, you are going to simply say, okay, it supports geolocation, and then all you do is say get current position. That's all. And in get current position, it takes two parameters. The first parameter is a method or a callback that is invoked when it gets the lat long. The second one is again a callback in case it is not able to get a lat long, and then you have a bunch of parameters in case you want to have high accuracy or not and things like that. So if you look at the callback for the show current location, which is called when it gets a proper GPS fix, it's very straightforward. The actual position object is populated for you, and you simply have to just extract out the latitude and the longitude stuff. So position.coordinates.latitude and position.coordinates.longitude. These are the two things that I will need. Of course, it gives you also altitude, speed, and other things about it, but this is enough for now to get a latitude and longitude. So really it's very straightforward. Find out if your browser supports geolocation, get the current position, and in the successful callback, get the latitude and longitude and display that. This is all we have in terms of the demos and the code and all. I'm just going to switch over to some of the concluding slides, and then we'll take over some of the Q&A. Okay. So on this slide, I'm going to talk about state of the HTML5. So basically, just summarizing in terms of the fact that HTML5 today, it's supported by a lot of browsers, both mobile as well as desktop. But then you still have some of them not supporting certain aspects of HTML5. So it's always important that you have to recognize that fact. Maybe use sites like html5test.com. To see what's the kind of features that your particular browser supports. You have a very good list even for at a site called caniuse.com. It looks at all mobile desktop browsers and tells you what are the features that it supports. So you can look at some of the commonality and start using those features today itself. Fallback behavior is very important. Do not assume that all your consumers or users are using HTML5 compliant browsers. So you must have a capacity to first detect. You would have seen some code if we were checking if geolocation supported, if local storage supported, things like that. You have to write code like that to have a fallback behavior just in case that browser is not supporting that feature. In terms of getting started, yes, a lot of browsers are supporting it. A lot of features are already supported since years. You can get started today itself. It's a great time really to go forward with it. Be prepared for changes because newer features are coming in certain old ways depending upon feedback, because it's not yet a final recommendation as such. It could undergo certain kinds of changes, and obviously the last part is very encouraging, which is that all vendors are fully behind this standard. So you can be assured that HTML5 is there to stay. It's not going away anytime soon. Here are a bunch of references that I've been using over time, but I suggest that one of the references over there, which is second HTML5 Rocks. It's a very good site for learning about HTML5. You've got basically books over there. You've got presentations. You've got videos. You've got a playground by which you can try out HTML5 APIs live. You've got lots of articles. I think that can be a good one-stop site that you can begin with to go deeper into HTML5 Rocks. And it's an official site from Google themselves. So documentation is of a quite high quality over there. Finally, thank you for coming in today to attend this HTML5 webinar. That's my email and the website. And soon I'll be conducting a detailed workshop for 2 days on HTML5. Any one of you is interested, you have the email right there, romin.irani@mindstormsoftware.com. Write to me. I'll inform you about the dates, which are likely to be in May, June types. And that mirrors my other Android workshop. This will be primarily on HTML5 with mobile programming especially. So I would like to thank Spanidia again for giving me the opportunity with the webinars, continuing from the Android one, which I had taken a couple of weeks back. It was nice having you.